All of you to the International Civil Aviation Organization's 40th Assembly SkyTalks. During a 2-week period, we have 68 presentations for you from aviation industry professionals, and I would welcome you to check out the ICAO SkyTalks channel on YouTube for more information. This is day 7, session number 1, and our following speaker will talk about capacity building on environment and how ICAO can help and support states. I would have you welcome Dr. Neil Dickson, Chief Environmental Standards.
Thank you for the introduction. So today, and good morning, everyone. So today I'm going to speak to you about assistance and capacity building on environment, and particularly how states can be assisted by ICAO. So in this presentation, we'll cover two projects. First of all, our ICAO European Union project that started in 2014, so a project funded by the European Union under ICAO. And then secondly, a project with the United Nations Development Programme funded by the Global Environment Facility, GEF. So to start with the ICAO EU project. This project was a €6.5 million project. And the intent of this project was to build capacity within 14 member states, and in this regard there were 3 objectives. I'll go through each objective one by one, but as a brief introduction, the first objective was to develop capacity in a state in terms of the team and develop a state action plan. The second was to install an aviation environmental system to help to collect data in each of the states. And the third one was focused on implementation measures, so what actually can be done to reduce CO2. I should also add that the 14 states cover Africa and the Caribbean. So here we led the project from ICAO HQ, but it's very important to recognize the regional offices of ICAO in the North America and Caribbean region, East and West Africa. So first of all, on the Objective 1 and states' action plans. Now, 2 days ago, we heard an excellent presentation from Demi Tai on the states' action plans. So you already all know about capacity building in terms of state action plans. This objective essentially was to improve the capacity and change the culture in a state. So to develop a team, so then they can deliver a state action plan. Now, in this regard, in terms of building a team, the team involved the Civil Aviation Authority, the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Transport, and various different other air navigation services, airlines, airports, and so on. Each state built this team so then they could deliver an action plan to do 2 things. One, to communicate their mitigation measures to ICAO, and of course understand which mitigation measures would be feasible in their state. What we saw from these 14 action plans were 218 mitigation measures distributed across 7 categories, and you can see it in this slide. They include aircraft technology, alternative fuels, improved air traffic management issues, more efficient operations, and so on. The second objective of the project, once that team is in place and the action plan has been built, was also trying to quantify the action plan, and to do that you need data. So here in ICAO, under the auspices of the ICAO EU project, we developed what we call the Aviation Environmental System. This is now currently installed in all of the 14 states. In fact, version 2 has actually just been rolled out in the 14 states. And this system should allow the efficient collection of fuel burn data from operators, so states can collate it, understand the emissions, and then communicate that to ICAO. But in addition to that, it will allow states to build a baseline, so they understand where they are right now in terms of CO2 emissions reductions, and understand each of their mitigation measures that I just showed you on the previous slide. Objective 3 really focused on what's really possible in terms of mitigation measures. So actually the implementation of pilot measures. And I'll take you through some of the details of these pilot measures right now. First of all, and there will be more details in the coming slides. We implemented a solar at gate project in both Cameroon and Kenya. I'll explain what that means in a minute. We also focused on the implementation of continuous climb operations and continuous descent operations. We also developed a range of feasibility studies in Trinidad and Tobago, looking at renewable energy at airports, and then feasibility studies on sustainable aviation fuels in the Dominican Republic, also in Trinidad and Tobago, Burkina Faso, and Kenya. So on this slide, you'll see, first of all, you'll see a very nice picture of our initiative in Douala, Cameroon. This is the implementation of a solar gate project. And let me just for one moment explain what that actually means. It's the installation of a solar panel array close to the airport, taking into consideration all the safety and various different regulations in the state. That solar panel array provides the clean energy to the airport. That clean energy is then used via an electrified gate to provide the aircraft with power when it's parked. So that means it provides preconditioned air to the aircraft and also a 400 hertz ground power supply. And you'll ask what the benefit of this is. Well, actually it means that the aircraft can switch off what's called its auxiliary power unit that it would typically use during boarding and just before departure. So that means we reduce fuel burn from international civil aviation using a clean energy source. And on this particular example in Cameroon, this means 2,600 tons of CO2 savings per year, and this affects 14 flights per day into that airport. Similarly, in Kenya, at Mombasa International Airport, we also installed a solar panel array. Smaller than in Douala, but following exactly the same principle that I just described to you. So in this regard, the reduction is 1,300 tons of CO2 per year, and it impacts 7 flights per day. I mentioned we also focused on operational measures and continuous climb operations and continuous descent operations. What that actually means is that the arrival and departure of aircraft are made more efficient, and the fuel used is reduced, and therefore the CO2 is reduced. These particular measures were implemented in Burkina Faso and Gabon. And the CO2 reduction in this case, in these two examples, is just over 1,200 tons per year. So we also developed 5 feasibility studies, 4 on sustainable aviation fuels and 1 on solar power at airport in Trinidad and Tobago. So each of these feasibility studies, and you'll find them all on our website, detail how these individual states can develop, in the case of sustainable aviation fuels at least, a sustainable aviation fuels sector. So it goes from the availability of the feedstock through to the processing, through to the distribution of the fuel. And to take one example of Kenya, in that feasibility study, it shows that 17 feedstocks are potentially available in Kenya. With Dominican Republic and Trinidad and Tobago, we saw that one state had the potential for a lot of feedstock for the fuel, and one had the potential for processing of the fuel without the feedstock. So there are some synergies between states as well. So that's our ICAO EU project. And as I said, the objectives were to build a state action plan team, develop a state action plan in 14 states, install an aviation environment system in the states so they can collect data and understand their mitigation measures, and then show via a set of pilot projects, whether they be solar at gate or operational measures, what can be done in some of those states. Now I'll move on to our second project. This project we refer to it as the ICAO UNDP GEF project. So a project run by ICAO with funding from UNDP GEF. The title of this project was Transforming the Global Aviation Sector and Emissions Reductions from International Aviation. So you'll get from that really our ambition was to show what can be done in terms of reducing emissions in the sector. So the key objective. Well, the key objective was to support developing states, and particularly small island developing states, strengthen their national capacities and reduce emissions from international civil aviation. And to do this, we have a number of objectives. First of all, the implementation of low emissions measures and understanding what that really means. So we carried out a study to look at implementation measures across the whole sector and looked at the costs and the benefits. We also developed unique guidance materials to help states understand each of these mitigation measures and how they may well go from a cultural change inside their civil aviation authorities through to implementing the measures. We developed an integrated technical platform which is available on our website. This allows you to ask questions of experts in ICAO on, well, everything I've talked about so far and so much more. And we also carried out a pilot project in Jamaica. So let me provide you with some details on each of these four. First of all, so component one. I already said that we wanted to understand the emissions reductions and the cost of each emissions reductions. Of course, that's very important when implementing a measure. So what we did in this regard is develop a marginal abatement cost curve for global aviation. We then took that marginal abatement cost curve and developed a tool so our states could manipulate this cost curve and develop their own individual cost curve for their states. Well, for those of you that don't know what I mean by marginal abatement cost curve, I'll just describe it to you in the next couple of slides. So the main function of a marginal abatement cost curve, or a MAC curve, is to try and understand what mitigation measures might be available and the cost, and then to rank them in order. So a MAC curve, and if you look at the slide, now, I'll take you through it. A MAC curve ranks mitigation measures with the x-axis showing the total CO2 abated, so the width of each bar, the height of each bar being the cost of CO2. So in this case, US dollars per ton of CO2. So you can see that I can rank from left to right the amount of CO2 abated and, of course, the cost. So a negative number on the y-axis shows a saving and a positive shows a cost. So what does that really mean in terms of CO2 reduction from global aviation? So what you'll see on this slide is a screenshot of our tool that's available to our states right now. It's available to our state action plan focal points. And also on the right-hand side, the marginal abatement cost curve for international civil aviation. So again, that shows 20 measures ranked by cost of CO2 per ton and CO2 abated. So it really does give our states a very useful tool to both rank and then select the most pertinent mitigation measures for them. And as I said, it's being used right now. So the second component of our project was to develop 4 guidance documents. Each of these guidance documents will provide a state with a particular information on how to either implement a team, a regulation, financing, develop sustainable aviation fuels, and many other different initiatives in the sector. This slide shows the front covers of these guidance documents. They are available free of charge on our website, and I urge you all to download them and read them. So moving from left to right, the first one is on renewable energy for aviation. So it really gives you a full view, some of which I've already talked about in terms of, say, a solar panel array and gate electrification, but a full overview of renewable energy for this sector. The second one gives you financing options for these particular measures. And actually in the appendix to this document, it actually also gives you a full list of where you might go to access certain financing mechanisms. It also goes through issues such as loans and bonds and all different financing mechanisms. The third one is about regulatory and organizational frameworks to address aviation emissions. And this gives you a cookbook of how to actually set your regulatory framework up and the organization of your authority. And then the fourth one is on sustainable aviation fuels. So really, it's in tandem with the feasibility studies that I've already talked about. They, in the ICAO EU project, give a particular state a perspective on how to develop fuels in their state. This document gives each state a general overview of how they can develop sustainable aviation fuels. So it covers the variety of feedstocks. It covers the variety of development techniques for sustainable aviation fuels in terms of processing and deployment. So component 3 was where you can really ask us questions in ICAO on all mitigation measures, whether they be technology-related, operational-related, sustainable aviation fuels, or indeed market-based measure. What you'll see on the next slide is a screenshot of this of the platform that currently sits on our website. It allows you to search through what is around 1,000 different measures. So then actually you can see the best practices of states and really learn what your state might do for itself. It also has the ability to ask us a question if you wish. So it really gives you a kind of one-stop shop of knowledge on all mitigation measures for aviation. Now, component 4. I spoke in the previous few slides about a solar gate project in 2 African states. Well, under this project, UNDP GEF, we developed a solar gate project in Jamaica. In fact, in 2 airports in Jamaica. Now, it's exactly as I described before. The benefit of these projects is to switch off the auxiliary power unit in the tail of the aircraft. This reduces the emissions from CO2 and allows clean energy to be used when the aircraft is at the gate. And in Jamaica, we installed this project in Montego Bay and in Kingston. This slide gives you a schematic overview of clean energy, so a solar panel array, clean energy entering the terminal of the airport, and then via the gate electrification, 400 hertz power supply being provided to the aircraft, and also preconditioned air. It's also very important to monitor this energy as it's produced and as it's used in the airport. And so actually in ICAO, after these projects have been finished, we continue to monitor how successful these projects are, as of course does the state. So I thought I'd include some photographs here of what our project looked like in Jamaica to give you a real feel for what this project actually is. So on the left-hand side of this slide, you'll see the solar canopy. So this is the solar panel array. It's actually built right in front of the terminal, the airport international airport in Kingston. And as you can see, it actually covers a car park. So it also provides some shade for travellers when they park their car. But it also gives the airport a way of showing what they're doing, because when travellers come to the airport, they can really see this solar panel array. They can also read lots of information about it, either via the information booth that's inside the airport, or an interesting plaque that's right outside the right in front of the canopy. The right-hand side shows the gate electrification and an electrified bridge. So this is where the aircraft will approach, connect to the gate, and also connect to the preconditioned air and the 400 hertz power supply, which of course will be supplied by the clean energy generated via the solar panel array. I think in terms of this project, what I'd quite like to leave you with is a message of replicability. This is also true for the pilot projects in the ICAO, under the ICAO EU project. These projects are really trying to show what's possible. So on our website, you'll find for both projects lots and lots of information on the successes of these two projects, particularly on the pilot projects, and then actually also how to do the projects, and also some lessons that we learned along the way. In terms of supporting states, it's not just actually reducing CO2 emissions ourselves, of course. Of course, these projects are successful in their own right and in this regard. But it's also important to show what can be done so then they can be replicated globally. And we've already heard some states doing this already. So, in conclusion, I described to you our ICAO EU project and the ICAO UNDP GEF projects. These projects have been run over the last 4 years and they have been extremely successful. They've given our states guidance material on how to implement projects, whether they be direct mitigation measures that we've shown them, such as solar at gate, or whether it's feasibility studies on sustainable aviation fuels and renewable energy. We've also provided them with documents that are available free of charge in order to change the structure of their organizations and how to understand how to access funding and how to assess all the mitigation measures via our marginal abatement cost curve tool, which again is available free of charge to our states. Now, ICAO is also continuing to investigate ways to provide similar support to member states. And one example that I can give is on sustainable aviation fuels feasibility studies. So those of you that are familiar with our sustainable aviation fuel stock taking event that happened earlier this year in May, will know that we encouraged both donors and recipients to tell us about potential offers to support a feasibility study and the need to conduct a feasibility study. And in this way, we can join states together. So it's also very important to recognize that, of course, this is a key example of our No Country Left Behind initiative here in ICAO, and we continue to work tirelessly in this organization to support our member states to understand CO2 mitigation measures. Now, you can find plenty more information on all of this in our environmental report that's available on our website. And with that, thank you very much for your attention.
If anybody has any questions, I would invite you to step up to the mic. Well, thank you, Dr. Dickson. Okay.